Hello. The real social impact assessment that I chose to review is the Mountain Valley Project and the Equitrans Expansion Project. The project overview of the MVP and the EEP, which is referred to in the environmental impact assessment. The project goals is to install new pipelines, approximately 310 miles of 42-inch diameter pipe with compressor stations and associated infrastructure in West Virginia, Virginia, and Pennsylvania to transport nearly 2 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day from the Appalachian Basin. I was interested in this project because of the location, because it's near to us in Ohio, and also because I wanted to learn more about the project itself, but also about the fracking operations involved, because it's a highly politicized topic at the moment. So I was hoping to learn more about why it's so politicized now. The funders of this project were the Mountain Valley Pipeline LLC in a joint venture with Equitrans Midstream Corp, Next Era Capital Holdings, Con Edison, WGL Midstream, and RGC Midstream. But the primary focus is on Mountain Valley Pipeline LLC. The proposed cost of the project was $3.5 billion. Currently, because of delays and ongoing public opposition to the project, the cost is nearly $7 billion to date. The final environmental impact statement was governed by, and the project is governed by NEPA. The lead agency is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They performed the final environmental impact assessment and the social impact assessment within the document. The final environmental impact assessment or statement was 930 pages. There was a supplemental environmental impact statement that was conducted by the National Forest Service that was 335 pages because a small section of the pipeline was going through the national forest. Here are some maps of the area where the pipeline was proposed. So on the left is the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which spans through West Virginia and Virginia. And then on the right is the Equitrans Expansion Project, which is a much smaller project, but it links some of the pipelines together. Here is just a larger view of how it all connects. So we see the Mountain Valley Pipeline going through West Virginia and Virginia, but it connects to the Transco pipeline. Not all of these projects are completed at the moment. They're in work, but that's the kind of a master plan, I suppose. The timeline is the pre-filing request from MVP to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission was on October 27th, 2014. The notice of intent was April 17th, 2015. June 2017, the final environmental impact statement was issued by the FERC. And in December 2020, the final supplemental environmental impact statement was prepared by the U.S. Forest Service. The project would, was expected to be completed in 2020, but there's been several delays due to permitting lawsuits, environmental concerns, safety concerns, and costs that have delayed the completion date. And so it's now expected to be completed in October of 2026 with almost twice the original budget. There has been significant amount of public concern related to the pipeline. Here's a couple of articles highlighting some of the protests that were happening in Washington, D.C., and then also in the area where protesters were chaining themselves to the equipment to stop some of the destruction of the natural environment. As far as data collection, I do think that the agency conducted a thorough assessment of the current state of the social environment for the area. They assessed employment opportunities for local contractors and laborers and increased tax revenue. They assessed impacts to the community, public safety resources, traffic impacts, impacts on environmental justice communities, impacts on home and businesses and land values, impacts on mortgage rates, impacts on the ability to obtain insurance, impacts on tourism. They consulted with local tribes, and then any culturally or historically significant properties were examined. And I have a couple screenshots of the data that was collected for each of the counties that were being impacted. They did a pretty good job of gathering ethnic and poverty statistics in the counties and the tourism activities. But the comparative analysis I feel was insufficient. So although there was extensive details on the current statistics related to socioeconomics, including housing, emergency services, tourism, transportation and traffic, property values, mortgage rates, insurance, and tax revenues, there was not sufficient comparative analysis conducted. There was one example that they provided where the Natural Gas Association of America concluded that in terms of the housing prices, so the impact of the pipeline installation on property values, whereas they were comparing houses in the same subdivision to say that the ones near to the pipeline were selling for similar costs as the ones farther away from the pipeline, which I feel like isn't a really good comparison because they're in the same subdivision, all being near to the pipeline. There was another example that I provided in the paper that there were some housing and mortgage rate comparisons done for communities that were in Connecticut, which is pretty far from the site, and they didn't provide that the population or the social environment of the neighborhood in Connecticut was even similar to that of the compare it to the communities that were affected by this pipeline installation. Also, the data was collected from the 80s and 90s, and this is happening in the 2000, tens. So I just don't think that it was a very thorough comparative analysis conducted. As far as public involvement, there was a decent amount of open house meetings. There were scoping meetings seeking feedback prior to the prior to the pre-filing stage. So I think that they attempted to gather as much feedback as possible, but there was only a 3-month window between the beginning of the assessment and the closing statements that were needed. The notice of intent was published April 28th, 2015, and then mailed to individuals and groups to explain the project and review the process. The list of folks was a preliminary list identified by the Federal Energy Commission. I feel like there was also a 90-day comment period allowed to the public to provide their feedback after the draft was completed. resulting in lots of comments and letters that ended up helping to modify some of the routes and suggest alternative routes. So it does show that there was an impact from the public participation, but I don't, not knowing what we know now, I don't think there was enough education about the impacts that were going to be resulting from the project. There were no, in terms of the social aspects of mitigation and monitoring strategies, there were none mentioned in the final environmental impact statement. So I have nothing to report here. There was a lot of data collected, but there was nothing to state that they would continue collecting data to understand the impacts of the project. So I think they failed in that regard. The final grade that I've given to this project assessment, the social impact assessment, is a C. Although they gathered a substantial amount of data related to the economic state of the communities to be impacted, the data was not utilized to plan for mitigation strategy. Monitoring of changes to key social indicators was not determined, and public involvement was minimal and limited to a 3-month period during the pre-filing stage. As the project progressed and concern related to the impacts of the project grew, more of the projects experienced delays due to protest lawsuits and safety concerns, which I think could have been avoided had they been more thorough in their assessment. Thank you so much.